A small plane rips through the cloud cover high above the Andes. Inside, 19-year-old Fernando "Nando" Parrado and his friends are jolted by turbulence, laughing nervously as the aircraft bucks. Suddenly, the laughter dies. Through the windows, a mountain peak appears alarmingly close. "Is it normal to fly so close?" one of them, Panchito Abal, asks with a shaky grin. I don't think so," Nando replies. His voice betrays a hint of fear. Then, impact. Metal shears and screams fill the cabin. The world turns into a blur of white snow and twisting steel, and in an instant, everything goes black. This is Black Box Investigation. Before I begin, subscribe, and don't miss what's next. Hello, I'm Walter Graves. I've been investigating aviation disasters for years, but this story, the 1972 Andes flight disaster, is unlike any I've ever studied. It's personal for me. Not because I was there, but because once I learned what happened to these people, their voices never left my mind. I've pored over survivor testimonies, official reports, even spoken to experts, all to piece together how 16 young men survived 72 days in one of the world's harshest environments. Today, I want to take you on that journey with me, day by day, through their nightmare and their triumph. It's a chronicle of endurance, faith, and the unbreakable will to live. Day 1, the crash. Friday, October 13th, 1972. A Uruguayan Air Force Fairchild, FH227D, chartered to carry a rugby team and friends over the mountains to Chile, crashes in a remote glacial valley of the high Andes. Later, investigators would blame a navigation error. The crew descended too early, thinking they'd cleared the range. They hadn't. The plane's tail clipped a ridge at 13,000 feet, shearing off, and the fuselage belly sledded down a steep slope before smashing to a halt on an icy mountainside. Of the 45 people on board, a dozen are gone in an instant, 3 crew and 9 passengers, including the pilot and Nando's own mother. Others are grievously hurt. Nando himself is knocked unconscious with a skull fracture. When he finally comes to, he doesn't know if it's been hours or days. He awakens to find himself in the twisted wreckage of the cabin, surrounded by snow and the moans of the injured. The air is thin, the cold, punishing. He blinks at the faces of his friends hovering over him. "Nando, are you okay? Nando." They gently tell him what he's missed. He's been out for 3 days. His head is bleeding but bandaged. His mother is dead. His younger sister, Susana, only 19, is barely clinging to life with a terrible head injury. His best friend, Panchito, the one who asked if it was normal to fly so close, is also dead, having been sucked out of the plane as it broke apart. Nando can't even process it yet. Staggering to his feet, Nando's first thought is of Susana. He finds her lying near the front of the broken fuselage, badly hurt and unable to move. He crawls to her side. Her feet are bare and purple with frostbite. She lost her shoes in the crash. She can only communicate with her eyes. Nando cradles her head in his lap and does what little he can. He scoops clean snow into his mouth, warming it into water, and drips it onto her parched lips. No cups, no supplies, just a brother's love trying to keep his sister alive. Around them, the remaining survivors assess their situation. The fuselage is open to the elements, one side torn away. Jagged metal, strewn luggage, and a few seats are all that's left of their world. Outside is nothing but towering mountains and endless snow. They are at 12,000 feet elevation in the thin air and bitter cold of the high Andes. Many of these young men have never even seen snow before. Now they're encased in it. Night falls quickly, bringing temperatures down to minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. With no proper clothing, most were dressed for spring in Chile, not an alpine winter. They huddle together in the demolished cabin for warmth. They use seat cushions as makeshift snowshoes when stepping outside, and salvage insulation in seats to wrap themselves. The team captain, Marcelo Perez, a natural leader, starts organizing basics: shelter in the fuselage, shared body warmth at night, tasks for each person. In shock and pain, they pray together for rescue. Surely search planes will come tomorrow. But tomorrow brings only heartbreak. They have a small transistor radio one guy, Roy Harley, found jammed between seats. On day 2, through crackling static, they catch news of the missing plane. Rescuers are scouring the mountains for them. A ray of hope. The survivors cheer and set out bright red luggage on the snow, hoping to catch a search plane's eye. They even try to stamp a giant SOS in the snow. But when aircraft buzz overhead, they fail to spot the wreckage, which from above is just another white speck on a white glacier. The searchers don't see the tiny figures waving desperately below. Each time a plane engine fades away, the stranded friends feel a wave of despair. In the first week, several more of the gravely injured succumb to their wounds and the cold. Nando's beloved sister Susana holds on for over a week, thanks in part to his care. But on day 9, her fight ends. Nando is shattered. He closes Susana's eyes and realizes he is now utterly alone. His mother and sister gone, his father back home likely assuming he's dead too. The survivors dig shallow snow graves outside the fuselage for the deceased and mark them with makeshift crosses. Every loss feels like a knife to the heart. These aren't strangers, they're teammates, family, best friends. By now, roughly 27 survivors remain from the original 45. They are starving, freezing, and exhausted, but they refuse to give up hope. Each morning they scan the sky for rescue. Each night they press together in the dark, sharing stories of home to keep their spirits alive. They still have a tiny ration of food, a handful of chocolate bars, a tin of almonds, a few snacks, and a couple bottles of wine that miraculously didn't break. They ration it to almost nothing. One survivor, it said, stretched a single chocolate-covered peanut over 3 days. Once the meager food is gone, they chew leather from luggage straps and even foam from seat cushions, trying anything to quell the hunger gnawing at their bellies. It's futile. There are no animals, no vegetation at this altitude, nothing but rock, ice, and snow. On the morning of day 11, they get the news that crushes their last hopes. Over the radio, an announcer says the search has been called off. The rescuers are abandoning the effort to find the missing plane. Inside the fuselage, a quiet, hopeless silence falls as the boys absorb the fact that no one is coming. Some start to sob, others whisper prayers. Nando, hollow-eyed from grief, just stares at the mountains glinting in the sunlight. After all they've endured, can this truly be the end? Suddenly, a voice breaks the silence. It's Gustavo Nikolic, Coco, one of the rugby players. With forced brightness, he calls into the plane, "Hey boys, good news! We just heard on the radio. They've called off the search." Stunned, a few of them actually smile, thinking it must be a joke. But others look at Coco like he's lost his mind. Inside the dim cabin, someone yells back, "Why the hell is that good news?" Coco grins and replies, "Because it means we're gonna get out of here on our own." For a moment, no one speaks. Then the meaning sinks in. They have no choice now but to save themselves. Coco's defiant optimism lights a spark in their hearts. Yes, it's insane, but it's all they have, each other. As one survivor later said, Coco's bold words prevented a flood of total despair from drowning them. Instead of giving up, they resolve right then and there to do whatever it takes to survive. Whatever it takes. But what if the unthinkable is the only way? Within hours of the search being called off, starvation looms as an immediate threat. The altitude and cold have made their bodies burn calories at a terrifying rate. They are emaciated, weak, and dizzy. Some are so hungry they feel their stomachs turning on themselves. Rescue isn't coming. There is literally no food left, aside from the leather in their shoes, which they've tried eating, only to gag on the chemicals. Nando, Canessa, and others venture outside and look at the makeshift tombs of their friends in the snow. The bodies are perfectly preserved by the cold, like meat in a freezer. And that's when the awful idea takes hold. It started as a faint thought days earlier, one they all tried to push away in horror, but now they face a brutal equation: eat or die. They argue, pray, agonize. These were their friends, their family. How could anyone desecrate their remains? Several are deeply religious. All were raised Catholic. Some fear that consuming human flesh, even from the dead, is a mortal sin that will damn their souls. One young man retreats into the wreckage, clutching a Bible, seeking an answer. "We asked God for guidance," another survivor remembered. "Without his consent, I felt I'd be violating my friend's memory, stealing their souls." They wonder if they have gone mad even to consider such a thing. Have we become savage? Or is this the only way? One wonders silently, teetering on the edge of despair. Finally, with reluctance and tears, they make a pact. Each of them gives permission. "If I die, you can use my body to live." In fact, it's an act of love. "No greater love hath a man than to lay down his life for his friends," one quotes from the Bible, finding strange comfort in the words. Others compare it to the Holy Communion, taking the flesh and blood to survive. With this solemn understanding and their faith to guide them, they steel themselves for the unthinkable. Roberto Canessa, a 19-year-old medical student, takes the lead. If they're going to do this, they need to do it cleanly. He uses a shard of broken glass from the windshield as a blade. Kneeling by one of the snow-entombed bodies, he whispers a short prayer, his breath visible in the frigid air. Then he cuts a thin strip of frozen flesh. The others watch, stomachs churning as Roberto trembles for a moment, and then forces himself to swallow that first matchstick-sized sliver of meat. A few turn away in revulsion. Another survivor, Eduardo, crosses himself and follows Roberto's example, choking down a tiny bite. Over the next hours, several more do the same. Nando, however, cannot bring himself to eat yet, not from someone else. He quietly wraps his mother's and sister's bodies in the snow, protecting them from this fate. For now, there are others to use. He won't let anyone touch his family unless it's truly the last resort. Days 12 to 16, the grisly meals give the group a new lease on life, physically at least. Human flesh, for all its horror, is rich in the calories and protein they so desperately need. They dry thin strips of meat in the sun on the sheet metal to make it easier to consume, turning their crash site into an eerily functional butcher shop. At first, most can only nibble the bare minimum to stay alive, gagging as they do it. They are disgusted with each mouthful, often bursting into tears or retching. Skin and muscle are one thing, but as days pass and hunger stays fierce, they even resort to organs, heart, lungs, even brains. Each bite is an ordeal of the spirit. They chew and cry and swallow, knowing this is what it takes to see another sunrise. Every evening, they gather in prayer. They pray for forgiveness, for the souls of the friends whose bodies they have used, and for the strength to keep going. In quieter moments, some admit that the taste is not what tortures them. It's the thought of what they've done. As one of the boys, José Luis Inciarte, would say years later, the worst part of the entire 72-day ordeal wasn't the cold or hunger or even the crash itself. It was the avalanche. Avalanche? Yes. Just when they think things can't get worse, the mountain finds a new way to test them. Day 17. Avalanche, night of October 29th, nearly 3 weeks stranded. A violent storm has been raging in the Andes. The survivors, now 16 days into their ordeal, are crammed shoulder to shoulder in the half-buried fuselage to wait out the blizzard. Sometime near midnight, a low rumble grows to a roar above them. Suddenly, the whole world seems to explode as an avalanche of fresh snow comes thundering down the slope. It slams into the broken plane and buries it completely, sealing every opening and plunging the survivors into instant darkness. Those who weren't fully inside are swept away to their deaths in seconds. Those huddled within are now entombed under yards of snow, packed so tight that breathing becomes difficult. For a moment, stunned silence, then panic, screams, chaos in the pitch black. The men closest to the opening claw at the snow, but it's like concrete. One by one, people start to suffocate as the air runs out. Nando feels someone go limp next to him. Enrique, Liliana, Gustavo, Juan, Diego, Carlos, Marcelo. One after another is unresponsive, smothered in the thick snow. 8 people die in a matter of minutes, including their team captain and leader, Marcelo Perez. Even Liliana Mitol, the last remaining woman who had tended to the injured like a mother, is gone, her body shielding her husband Javier, who miraculously survives. When the avalanche finally settles, only the faint cries of a handful of survivors remain in the dark. Nando manages to force his arm upward through the snow, groping for any pocket of air. In the blackness, he finds a metal pole, part of the luggage racks. Summoning strength fueled by sheer will, he shoves the pole upward toward where he thinks the cockpit windshield is. Crack! The pole punches through something, and a trickle of snow grains spills in. But then, a whisper of cold, fresh air. He's done it. He's poked a small breathing hole to the outside. The survivors take turns gasping at the precious oxygen. It's enough to keep them alive through the night. Morning comes, day 18. Nando and a couple of others begin the excruciating task of digging an escape tunnel out of the packed snow. It takes them hours of labor, clawing and burrowing like trapped animals. When they finally emerge into the blinding daylight, they see that the blizzard hasn't let up. It lashes at their faces, forcing them back inside their icy cave. For 3 days, they remain trapped under the snow, a howling storm outside, and the bodies of their friends, the 8 who died in the avalanche, now lying frozen beside them inside the fuselage. Imagine that, sharing your already cramped shelter with the corpses of your closest companions, entombed together in darkness. On the 3rd day, hunger drives them to yet another heartbreaking necessity. The avalanche victims by cruel fate have become their new source of food. With nothing else to eat and no way to venture out in the storm, the survivors resort to cutting thin slices from their newly deceased friends. Nando forces himself to do it this time. Later he would describe that first bite. It was soft and greasy, streaked with blood and bits of wet cartilage. I gagged hard when I put it in my mouth. He swallows, tears streaming down his face, and silently apologizes to his fallen friends. This is how they live through the avalanche, by consuming the very people it killed. In their minds, it's not betrayal. It's their friends, saving them one last time. When the blizzard finally subsides, the survivors crawl out from their snow cave and into a scene of utter desolation. The whole valley is blanketed. The fuselage, once half exposed, is now mostly buried. They dig out and carefully move the 8 avalanche victims' bodies outside. The group bows their heads and says a prayer over them, and they make a grim agreement. Liliana's body will not be eaten no matter what. She was the only woman, a mother of 4, an almost saintly figure to them. They cannot bring themselves to touch her. The others, however, have already unwittingly given of themselves for the group's survival. It's another burden the survivors will carry for life. Marcelo, their captain and strongest leader, is gone. The survivors reorganize. New leaders emerge. Brothers and cousins, Eduardo and Fito Strauch, along with another young man, Daniel Fernandez, step up to keep morale in order. They increase ration portions slightly now that there's more food available, distributing flesh to each person as needed. Hard as it is to stomach, literally and morally, the protein revives them. A few who had stubbornly refused to eat the meat finally relent. Even Javier, who lost his wife Liliana, realizes he must eat or die. If you're still listening, you know what to do. Hit like and subscribe to support me and my investigation. November 1972, over a month on the mountain. The weather gradually improves as summer approaches in the southern hemisphere, but the nights are still deadly cold. The survivors know they can't wait indefinitely. Even with the macabre sustenance, they will eventually weaken. They have to find a way out. Before the avalanche, some had suggested trying to hike out to find help. Now, with their camp half destroyed and their ranks thinned, that idea becomes urgent. They remember the last words of the co-pilot before he died. He insisted they had already flown past the mountains into Chile. If that were true, civilization would lie just a few miles to the west. In reality, this was tragically false. The plane's navigation was off, and they were deep in the Andes, about 89 kilometers east of any towns. But none of them know that. They cling to the hope that Chile is just over the next ridge. The group decides to send out an expedition to find a way out. First, they need to test how far a person can go in this terrain. A few shorter scouting trips around the crash site had already taught them how brutal the conditions are. The thin air makes every step exhausting. The glare of sun on snow can blind you. They only have a couple of homemade sunglasses from salvaged plastic. And at night you'll freeze to death if caught in the open. Earlier, whenever anyone wandered even a moderate distance from the fuselage, altitude sickness and dehydration forced them back. They realize any long trek will require careful planning, warmer clothing, and some way to survive the nights outside. By mid-November, after days of discussion and preparation, they're ready to make a serious attempt. Nando Parrado is determined to go. He's driven by a fierce promise he made to himself as he watched his sister die. "I will not let my father lose his entire family. I will get out of here." Roberto Canessa also volunteers. As a medical student, he knows their health is deteriorating, and this is their only shot. And Antonio Tintin Vicentin, one of the sturdiest of the group, is chosen as the third member. Originally, a fourth, Numa Turcati, was slated to go, but his leg injury has become infected. He can barely walk. These three are given larger rations of human meat in the days leading up to departure to build their strength. Other survivors donate bits of clothing, extra sweaters, socks, anything, to outfit the climbers against the cold. They even fashion a crude sleeping bag by stitching together insulating material from the plane's interior and copper wire. Carlitos Paez, whose mother taught him to sew, takes the lead in that odd project. Using needles and thread from a sewing kit, he and others carefully sew patches of quilted fabric into a large two-person sleeping sack. It's not pretty, but it might just keep them from freezing overnight on the open slopes. On November 15th, the three expeditionaries, Nando, Roberto, and Tintin, set out from the crash site for the very first time. The entire camp gathers to see them off. With makeshift packs on their backs and optimism in their hearts, they trudge into the knee-deep snow, heading east down the valley. They initially choose what looks like an easier route down, hoping it might curve towards Chile. Everyone left behind is anxious. This is the first time their group has split up. They promise to return with help, or die trying. For the first day, the trek goes better than expected. After a few hours of laborious downhill hiking, the trio's spirits soar when they stumble upon a stunning find, the tail section of the aircraft. It had broken off in midair and ended up farther down the mountain. Inside the tail, they discover a treasure trove of supplies, unopened suitcases with extra clothes, some candy and snacks, even a box of wine and a bottle of rum. There are comic books, a little medicine, and to their great excitement, the plane's battery and a portable radio transmitter. Could they possibly rig it to send an SOS? They spend the night camped inside the tail section's cramped interior for shelter. They even manage a small celebratory fire using some seat cushions and a few drops of rum. For the first time in over a month, they feel almost cozy, reading comic books by firelight and joking like it's a campout. Hope is flickering alive. The next morning, buoyed by their find, they push further east, but things quickly deteriorate. The terrain is treacherously steep. Tintin and Roberto both suffer snow blindness as the sun's glare pierces their eyes. The makeshift sunglasses aren't enough. By the second night away, the temperature plummets and they nearly freeze despite huddling in the sleeping bag, shivering uncontrollably and realizing they might not survive another night exposed. They reluctantly make a painful decision. Turn back to the tail, retrieve the battery, and haul it to the fuselage where the others wait. Perhaps with the battery, they can power up the radio system and call for rescue without having to scale these peaks. Dragging the heavy 24-kilogram battery through deep snow up a mountain proves to be a nightmare. After an arduous struggle, they reach the fuselage again, greeted by relieved cheers. But the plan to use the battery hits a wall. They spend several days trying to rig the battery to the aircraft's radio, only to find out it's hopeless. Unbeknownst to them, the radio requires a different voltage and current than the battery can provide, so it will never function off that power source. Exhausted and demoralized, the would-be expedition team and the others realize no one is coming to save us. We have to save ourselves by walking out. There's no other way. In late November, a setback. One of the survivors, Arturo Noguera, dies from the infected wounds he'd been nursing since the crash. A few days later, Rafael Echevarren also succumbs to his injuries. They were both among the quiet, steady friends who held out through so much, now gone nearly 6 weeks into the ordeal. Each loss reminds the group how precarious their own lives are. But perhaps the most heartbreaking of all comes on day 60, December 11th, when Numa Turcati, the gentle soul who had been so repulsed by eating flesh that he barely ate at all, finally slips away. Starvation and infection overcame him. Numa's death shakes everyone. He was the last to die on the mountain. Now 16 survivors remain, and they all understand. If they don't leave now, none of them will be alive much longer. So they prepare for one final desperate expedition. The big one, over the top of the mountains to Chile. The sleeping bag is finally finished, sadly, completed just after Numa's death. The group unanimously agrees Nando Parrado must lead the journey. He has proven to be almost superhuman in toughness and willpower. After everything, losing his family, surviving a coma, digging them out of an avalanche, Nando is driven by a singular purpose: get off this mountain and save his friends. He's also one of the fittest left, thanks in part to being well-fed to prepare. Roberto Canessa, though initially hesitant, he feels weak and fears he might slow Nando down, is convinced to be Nando's partner. Antonio Tintin Vizintin will join as well. They plan for the climb of their lives. For days, the three men train by taking short walks outside, trying to build up endurance. The others help modify clothing. Nando ends up wearing 3 pairs of jeans layered together, multiple sweaters, and 4 pairs of socks inside plastic bags for boots. They scrap together a small pack of provisions. Strips of dried human meat equivalent to maybe a 3-day supply of food, a bit of chocolate and wine, some matches, and the sleeping bag. Crucially, Nando carries a page torn from a map. They think Curacao, a town in Chile, might be just beyond the nearest summit to the west. In reality, that was a tragic misinformation from the co-pilot. But believing it to be true gives them confidence. They figure it's a 1 or 2 day hike at most. La Day 62, December 12, 1972. The weather is clear. After heartfelt goodbyes, not knowing if they'll ever see their friends again, Nando, Roberto, and Tintin set out westward, up the steep wall of snow and rock looming above the crash site. They each carry the warmest clothes available and some sunglasses. The slope is much harder than they imagined. a 60-degree incline of soft summer snow that forces them to sink waist-deep with each step. The air is painfully thin. Every few steps they stop, lungs burning, hearts pounding. Nando, fueled by determination, pushes ahead quickly, often having to pause and let Roberto and Tintin catch up. They camp at night in the insulating sleeping bag, all three squeezed together on the mountainside. The first night, a brutal wind rakes the ridge and nearly blows them off a ledge. Roberto later said it was the worst night of his life. But huddled together, their combined body heat just barely keeps them alive till morning. Day 2 of the climb is torturous. They expected to reach the peak by now, but it keeps receding further as they trudge upward. By the third morning, December 14th, the three men reach the top of the ridge, about 4,500 meters, 15,000 feet, above sea level. They crest it with hearts full of hope, expecting to see green valleys leading to Chile. Instead, when Nando pulls himself over the last ice-crusted rock, his blood runs cold, in every direction. Nothing but endless, jagged mountains, all blanketed in white. No towns, no roads, just a sea of peaks stretching to the horizon. It hits them that they have been far deeper in the Andes than they ever knew. Roberto catches up and collapses next to Nando, eyes scanning the desolation. "We're dead," he mutters in defeat. Nando refuses to accept that. Staring westward, he notices one distant valley where the mountains seem lower, the western sky a bit brighter. Maybe, just maybe, the way out lies that way. He turns to Roberto. "We may be walking to our deaths, but I'd rather walk to meet my death than wait for it to come to me. In other words, if they're going to die, then so be it. But it will be on their feet, not in the fuselage." Roberto meets his gaze. "You and I are friends, Nando," he says quietly. "We've been through so much. Now let's go die together." The two share a nod, a pact sealed in resolve. Even if it's hopeless, they will keep going. They decide that Tintin, the third climber, should turn back at this point. Their food supply is almost gone, and with 3 people, it will never last long enough. Tintin protests. He doesn't want to abandon them. But Nando and Roberto insist. They're at the top. He can slide back down to the tail in a fraction of the time and survive. Tintin finally agrees on the promise that Nando and Roberto will continue and succeed. Before he leaves, they hand him a few letters they've written to loved ones. In case none of them make it, they scribbled these back at camp, heartbreaking farewells just in case. Then they say goodbye. Tintin uses a piece of plane seat as a sled and glides down the slope they climbed, disappearing from sight, bound back to the crash site with news of what they've seen. Now it's just Nando and Roberto, 2 half-starved friends alone in the vastness of the Andes. They have no map, no compass, and almost no food, but they have purpose. Nando's mind is fixed on his father's face, the man who thinks his entire family is dead. Roberto thinks of his own family, of the life he still wants to live as a doctor. Those thoughts fuel their steps as they begin the long trek down the other side of the mountain. For several days, they descend and traverse ridge after ridge, navigating by intuition and the flow of valleys. They ration the last bits of their meager food, eating small strips of dried flesh sparingly. As they drop lower in altitude, the snow begins to thin. By day 9 of their trek, around December 20th, they start to see signs of life neither has seen in 2 months. Green patches of grass peeking through rocks, then a crawling insect, then, amazingly, animal droppings. Cow dung. They can hardly believe it. It means cattle have been here, and if there are cattle, there are people somewhere not far. That discovery spurs them onward despite their exhaustion. Roberto's legs are swollen and sore. He's limping heavily, and Nando practically drags him at times. Their clothes are filthy and tattered, lips cracked, faces gaunt with sunken eyes. But they carry on, one step at a time. Late that afternoon, as the two follow the curve of a flowing river, Nando spots something that makes him stop in his tracks. A few cows standing on a distant hillside. Actual, living cows. Roberto sees them too, and tears well up in his eyes. They must be near a ranch or farm. Civilization is close. Fueled by a sudden adrenaline rush, they push on as daylight fades. And then, as if out of a dream, 3 men on horseback appear on the far side of the river. They are arrieros, Chilean muleteers or shepherds, tending their cattle in this remote region. Nando and Roberto shout and wave frantically, but the river's roar drowns their voices, and the riders are on the opposite bank, some distance away. One rider spots the strange figures across the water, 2 ragged skeletal men gesturing wildly. It's nearly dark, and he can't make out what they're saying. Nando, desperate, throws himself to the ground and mimics an airplane with his arms, then crashes them into the ground. He's trying to communicate. "We came from a plane crash." The rider, baffled, cups his hand to his ear. Over the river's thunder, he shouts one word to them. "Tomorrow!" He makes a motion indicating they should stay put. Then the 3 horsemen ride off into the dusk, leaving Nando and Roberto uncertain if help is coming or if the men will return at all. That night, December 20th, Nando and Roberto collapse on the riverbank. They start a small fire using dry brush, the first real fire they've had in 72 days, and huddle by its warmth. They have nearly no food left. Roberto is so weak he can hardly stand, but tomorrow holds promise. Nando allows himself to feel something strange, contentment. "Roberto," he whispers, as his friend drifts off, "tomorrow we're going to get out of here." Roberto murmurs a prayer in response. Above them, brilliant stars fill the sky, and for the first time in a long while, they fall asleep with a sense of peace. Day 71, December 21st. True to his word, one of the horsemen returns in the morning. This time he's on Nando and Roberto's side of the river. His name, they will learn, is Sergio Catalan, a local Chilean farmer. Catalan approaches cautiously and finds 2 emaciated strangers, their clothes in tatters, faces hollow. They must look like ghosts. Nando, trembling with emotion, starts speaking in Spanish, voice cracking. "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains." But Catalan can't catch all the details over the river's noise. He motions for Nando to wait, then scribbles something on a piece of paper, ties it along with a pencil to a rock, and tosses it gently across the water to them. Nando picks it up. The note reads, "Tell me what you want." Hands shaking, Nando scrawls a reply on the same paper. In barely legible script, he writes an unbelievable message. "I come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. My friend is injured and there are 14 others still up there in the plane. They are also injured and weak. We have nothing left to eat. We need help. Please, when are you going to come fetch us? We can't even walk. Where are we?" He wraps the paper around the little rock. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, he hurls it back across the river. It hits the bank, and Catalan snatches it up and reads. His eyes widen in shock. He looks back at these 2 gaunt young men. Could they truly have survived a crash 10 weeks ago? Seeing their desperation is proof enough. He shouts to them, "Entiendo! I understand," and waves an arm, signaling that he will get help. Catalan reaches into his saddlebag and throws a loaf of fresh bread across the water. Nando and Roberto pounce on it gratefully, the first real bread they've tasted in over 2 months, as Catalan mounts his horse and gallops away to alert authorities. Nando collapses to his knees, clutching the bread and sobbing in joy and relief. They did it. They found help. Roberto, barely conscious, whispers a thank you to God. The ordeal is almost over. Catalan rides hard for hours that day, covering dozens of kilometers down the valley to the nearest village with a police station. By that evening, word has reached the Chilean army that someone from the long-lost flight is alive and in a mountain village called Los Maitenes. The news is so incredible, that when it hits radio stations and newspapers, people at first refuse to believe it. 16 survivors alive after 72 days in the Andes. It seems like a miracle, and indeed that is what the world will come to call it, the miracle of the Andes. Day 72, December 22nd, 1972. Early morning at Los Maitenes, Nando and Roberto awaken in real beds inside a little cabin, warm and safe. For the first time in over 2 months, they are not shivering. Locals have fed them hot meals and given them clothes. Both men are nearly unrecognizable from the robust athletes who boarded the plane in October. Roberto has lost half his body weight, now under 100 pounds. Nando's ribs stick out like a skeleton. But they are alive, and help is finally on the way for their friends still on the mountain. Chilean Army helicopters arrive, along with a flood of journalists hungry for the sensational story. Nando and Roberto immediately insist on leading rescuers back to the crash site. Despite their weakened state, Nando in particular is adamant. He will guide them. A helicopter pilot hands Nando a map and asks him to point out the location. Nando's never seen an aerial map of this area, but he intuitively traces the route he and Roberto walked, backtracking it to the mountain. The pilots and soldiers eye the 2 survivors with astonishment. It's hard to fathom these skeletal young men climbed over those formidable peaks, now visible in the distance. The weather in the Andes is still tricky. Thick clouds cling to the mountains that morning. The first helicopter lifts off with Nando aboard to navigate. He peers out as they ascend, heart pounding. What if he can't find the crash site from the air? What if the fog ruins everything? The helicopter battles turbulence and low visibility, forcing them to detour around peaks. Nando's fear starts to rise. After all this, what if they can't locate his friends? Then, through a break in the clouds, he spots below exactly what he hoped to see: the wreckage of the Fairchild plane. Now just a tiny metal shell on a snowy slope with a cluster of black dots outside it. Those black dots move and wave. They are people, his people. Nando shouts, "Ali, Ali! There, there!" The helicopter pilot maneuvers carefully and finds a spot to hover with one skid touching the ground. It's too high altitude for a full landing, and they can't take everyone in one go. But when the side door opens, what a scene! The survivors below are leaping and crying with joy, arms outstretched. After 72 days of nightmare, the rescuers have finally arrived. Nando jumps out onto the snow, immediately swarmed by his friends, those who can still walk. There are tearful embraces, incredulous stares. Felix, one of his teammates, laughs in sheer disbelief. "Nando, you made it!" Others just sob openly, overcome. In that moment, the nightmare transforms into a shared miracle. They did not die. They refused to die. Because of the thin air, each helicopter can only carry half the survivors at a time. Nando quickly helps load the weakest, ensuring Roberto's message gets through. There are 14 still here, not counting him and Roberto. 6 survivors plus a few rescuers board the first chopper and fly out. The rest must endure one more night on the mountain, but now they have medics and warm supplies with them, and absolute certainty that their salvation is at hand. One rescuer who stays behind, looking at these gaunt young men, can't help asking how on earth they survived. The survivors glance at each other and some simply bow their heads. They know the question of the hour will soon be asked by the entire world. For now, they're just grateful to be alive. The next morning, December 23rd, the helicopters return and ferry the last 8 survivors off that godforsaken mountain. It's over. 72 days after the crash, 16 souls out of 45 emerge alive. When the survivors reach the hospital in San Fernando, Chile, they are greeted by cameras flashing, doctors rushing to treat frostbite, malnutrition, broken bones, you name it. Reporters bombard them. How did you survive? What did you eat? The survivors exchange wary looks. They know this will be hard to explain. Eventually, the truth comes out piece by piece. Yes, they ate the bodies of the dead to stay alive. Around the world, Headlines scream of cannibalism in the Andes. There is initial shock, even revulsion, among some. But as the full story becomes known, judgment fades, replaced by awe at what these young people endured. Many begin to see them not with scorn, but with respect. In the words of one commentator, the human spirit triumphed over death itself on that mountain. At the hospital, after being deloused, fed, and given a hot shower, Nando Parrado stands before a mirror. He almost doesn't recognize the ghostly face looking back. His once athletic frame is skin and bone, but he's alive. "I'm alive," he whispers to himself again and again, tears mingling with the water on his face. It's as if repeating it might finally make it real. "I'm alive." The aftermath of the Andes ordeal is another story in itself. How families rejoiced, how the survivors coped with fame and trauma, how they returned to the crash site later with priests to properly bury their friends and erect a memorial. But those are chapters for another time. As an investigator and storyteller, what stays with me is the image of those boys. Because really, they were just boys, stranded in impossible conditions, who refused to give up. They made a pact that all of them would survive or die trying. They held on to faith, faith in God, faith in each other, when logic said there was no hope. They had to do the unimaginable to keep that faith alive. And in the end, they achieved the impossible. Their 72-day ordeal in the Andes is more than a tale of cannibalism or disaster. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. I often ask myself, could I have done what they did? Honestly, I don't know. But I do know this: when their lives hung by a thread, they found strength in friendship, love, and the will to see their families again. As Nando Parrado later said, "I was saved by love." Love for his father drove him down that mountain. Love for their friends made them willing to sacrifice and do the unthinkable. I'm Walter Graves, and this has been one of the most incredible survival investigations I've ever shared. The Black Box doesn't lie. Neither do we. Like, comment, subscribe. Help me bring forgotten stories back to light.